I'm from Disabled Women Ireland. Disabled Women Ireland is a DPO. That's a disabled persons organisation. And what that means is that over 50% of the board are disabled people. And under the UN CRPD, which is the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities, which is a mouthful, the views and extra weight is given to the perspective of DPOs, or should be. It's not, but that's what it should be. All members of Disabled Women Ireland are actually disabled people. We don't have any non-disabled people on our board. And we're completely voluntary. We're a completely voluntary organisation. Okay. So I'm just going to run through this. I'm doing a really terrible thing where I have slides with loads of information on them. The thing you're told not to do when you're doing a presentation. But unfortunately, this is such a huge area and it doesn't really get a lot of attention. There's very little research or very poor research. Most of the research that we've had to use today has been international research. But one of the things that is shown is that internationally throughout the world, these figures hold true for every country that the research has been done. So there's no reason to believe that it'd be different in Ireland. So this is just some basic information about disabled people in Ireland. And then I'll go more specifically into the issues as relations to domestic abuse. So in Ireland, EU figures say that 19.9% of women identify as disabled. The intersectionality between membership of the LGBTQIA+ traveller and ethnic minority communities means that there are higher rates of disability within those communities. So it's important when we're talking about things to remember that people may be multiply marginalised and that disability doesn't exist in a vacuum. Ireland is officially the worst country in the EU to be disabled in terms of poverty, social exclusion and unemployment. It's not a statistic we should be very proud of, to be honest with you. Disabled people in Ireland are 3 times more likely to live in consistent poverty. Only 25.8% of disabled women in employment compared to 71% of the general population. Those that are in employment tend to be in underemployment, part-time employment, very precarious work. The disability allowance is means tested, and that means that a lot of people can't work because they're afraid of losing their allowances. The UK figures show that half of disabled pregnant people experience intimate partner violence when pregnant. Now that statistic is true for all women, that it can increase when people are pregnant. It's significantly more serious for disabled women. It's important to note that over 8,000 disabled people live in residential centres in Ireland. So there's a whole cohort of people that are subject to a different form of abuse. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. So some key information around disabled people and intimate partner or domestic abuse. Disabled women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience all gender-based violence than their non-disabled peers. That's up to 78%. So that's a huge statistic. They're more than 4 times likely to have experienced sexual abuse in the past year. Women with cognitive impairments were found to experience violence at a rate of 10.7 times higher than non-disabled women. Disabled people are more likely to suffer abuse, violence, exploitation at the hands of a family member or co-resident than non-disabled people. And that's important in terms of legislation, which I will talk about later. They're more likely to experience violence from a caregiver than non-disabled peers. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. If you want to go on to the next slide. So disabled women are more likely to experience increase in domestic violence as they age, which shows a difference between non-disabled peers. Generally, non-disabled peers experience more abuse the younger they are, and as they age, the abuse lessens. For disabled people, that actually increases the more they age and the more, I suppose, vulnerable or dependent they become. disabled children are 3 to 7 times more likely to experience abuse, and 49% of disabled women who are talking about domestic abuse were abused as children as well. Disabled women and children are more likely to be murdered by their family members or caregivers. There's a day, it's a very difficult day, called Disabled Day of Mourning, where those people are remembered. And it is shocking how often it happens, and it is shocking how little the legal system does about it. Through our research, we have found only one case where a caregiver murdered a child and actually got a sentence, and that was overturned on appeal. So it's an extremely worrying and terrifying statistic, and that, as I said, that's internationally as well. That's not just a thing that's specific to Ireland. There's evidence that disabled women are more risk of being targeted for trafficking, especially those with a cognitive disability. Now, the reason that unfortunately, there's far more statistics that I could give you around this. But the reason that I drew attention to this is these statistics are shocking. These statistics are huge. Yet, how many disabled people present at a refuge? How many disabled people present at services looking for refuge every year or even every month? And that's the thing that we need to think about. Disabled people are far more vulnerable. And when I say vulnerable, it's not an inherent characteristic of disability. Just because you're disabled does not inherently mean that you are vulnerable. But the way that the system is set up, the way the society is set up, the way economic factors and other factors play into it means that disabled people are being made vulnerable. So we need to look at why can't they access service? What are the barriers to them accessing service when the statistics are so high, when we know so many disabled people are at risk of violence? Why are so few presenting to services? The next slide. So here are a number of factors. I actually have about 3 pages more that I could have put up here. It's very difficult to narrow it down. So one of the major things is financial dependence. We all know about financial control and financial abuse. But disabled people, a lot of times their payments are tied, they're means tested to, if they have a partner, they're means tested. An awful lot of times things like carers allowance are paid to their caregiver, not paid to them. So an awful lot of disabled people can end up very financially dependent, especially if their partner is very controlling. A lack of independence regards to support or housing, not having a choice where you live, not having a choice who supports you. Disabled Women Ireland would argue and want the access to access to personal assistance put on a statutory basis, which would mean that it's different from a home help or a caregiver that comes in. It means that the disabled person is given the money and they decide who their support is and who they hire the person, basically. There's an increased likelihood of institutionalization or residential leaving. This is a threat that is used against an awful lot of disabled women if they try to leave. Increased social isolation. Unfortunately, being disabled can mean that people are socially isolated anyway without any link to domestic abuse. But obviously, as we know, a lot of perpetrators will socially isolate their victim from their family and from their friends. This increases, the vulnerability to this increases if you're disabled. Stigma. There's a lot of stigma, especially around developmental conditions. Physical and informational barriers. So your service may not be accessible, or people might not know how to access the information. Don't know about your service, don't know how to find your service. A study done in England of women with cognitive and neurodevelopmental differences found that 100% of them had no idea how to contact their local refuge. So the lack of education, particularly sex education, this is an enormous problem for disabled people, especially people who have been disabled since childhood, that their doctors are reluctant to talk about them. There's a perception that disabled people are asexual beings that don't, like, why would they need to know about sex or they don't have sex? And the reluctance to talk to them about consent, about bodily autonomy and all this, which obviously leads disabled people very vulnerable to abuse. A lack of training and support services specifically around disability. We would argue that there needs to be targeted training delivered by DPOs, or, at least partly delivered by DPOs. Fear of losing custody of children. This is a massive one. We in Disabled Women Ireland have had people talking to us about this, and it's not, unfortunately, it's not an out there suggestion. In 2018, an Australian study found that I think it was something like 49% of women that presented to a domestic abuse service for support lost the custody of their children. So if it comes down to a choice of losing your children or staying where you are, many disabled people will stay where they are, fortunately. Okay. So barriers to accessing refuge, I've kind of touched on these before. Inaccessible contact methods. And what we mean by that is, do you only have a helpline? What if somebody's non-speaking? What if somebody is deaf? What if, like, there was a recent study done with actually she's an Irish doctor, Dr. Mary Doherty, and for example, autistic people really struggle to make phone calls. 70% of autistic people avoid. Now this was done around healthcare, but we can extrapolate that the same difficulties would arise. 70% of autistic people don't ring the doctor because they don't like phone calls. That's how much they don't like phone calls. They won't get necessary healthcare. If you only have a helpline, or people can only access you through a website, are you sure that your website is accessible to people who are dyslexic, people who are dyscalculate, people, inaccessible to those, sorry. So the next part is inaccessible to those with physical disabilities. We've tried researching this. We could not find information on Ireland on actual refuges and how accessible they are. From personal experience, I know that the one I'm aware of is not accessible. Things like if you have a wheelchair bathroom, is it part of a room, or do people have to leave the room and go down a corridor just to use the bathroom? Do you have hoists? Do you have adult changing tables? And I know we have to have fire doors, and I understand that, but they're an accessibility difficulty for people. I know cases of people who have gone to refuges and had to leave because they just couldn't live their day-to-day life. Inaccessible access to information. There's a lot of forms involved in accessing refuge services. And I don't know about every service, but do you have them in easy to read? Do you have them in plain English? Do you have them in Braille? Are they accessible to a screen reader? Screen readers can't read PDFs, for example. And do you know the difference between an easy to read document and a plain English document, because they're not the same thing? So another thing that makes accessing refuge difficult, especially for those who are autistic or those who have CPTSD or anxiety, is the sensory environment. Refuges are noisy places. There's a helpline phone going all the time. There's families living very close together. Multiple children could be living in different rooms. There's people cooking. They're quite overwhelming. They're quite overwhelming environment to be in, and that can be a barrier to accessing refuge. Paperwork, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of paperwork, and that can be overwhelming. That can be very overwhelming for people, to the point where they're like, no, actually, this is too much hassle. Interviews and interventions, we have to do it. You have to do interviews when they arrived, and then they have to go and talk. They have to talk to so many different services, different people. There's a lot of expectation. And if you have executive functioning issues, if you have processing difficulties, if you have differences in communication, all of that can be insurmountable all at once when you are already in a stressful, very stressed state. As mentioned before, the people living in institutional or residential living facilities, if they're being abused in those residential living facilities or in those institutions, how do they access refuge when they don't have access, may not have access to their own phone or to their own communications? Might only be through a caregiver. And again, as I mentioned, the lack of specific training or knowledge of disability of staff. If you don't know what to look out for, basically you won't know what to look out for and what you need to do. So the next part, sorry. So in terms of the court system and the legal system, I don't know if Clarehaven runs a court accompaniment service, but there are specific difficulties with disabled people accessing the legal system. So many documents and records are inaccessible to those who use screen readers. Now, in fairness, the court system in Ireland are addressing that, and they are trying to convert a lot of documents to Word. Most Garda stations and courts are inaccessible or not fully accessible. Most of them were built at a time where it wasn't even a thought in people's heads. Access to documentation is at the discretion of the judge and may incur cost. Obviously, that's a difficulty, as we mentioned, how many disabled people are on low income or underemployed. This one is very important for me as a neurodivergent person, but also as a kind of hidden disability thing that people mightn't think about. Systematic ableist biases regarding competence or credibility. So what that means is there's an assumption that if you have an intellectual disability, if you have a cognitive difference, that you're inherently, your capacity is questioned when you go. So if you're a witness in your own case, if you're an autistic person, you may have a meltdown from the stress of being in the situation, the stress of all of it. That can be used against you and seen as a challenging behavior rather than a person under extreme stress. Another thing that happens that not very many people are aware of when it comes to autistic people is what's called shutdown. Shutdown is basically an internalized meltdown, but what it can mean is that a person, like as it says, a person can shut down. So they may be situationally non-speaking or mute. They may be incapable of speaking. They may be incapable of making eye contact. They may look guilty to an outside observer because they're not responding, or they're not responding to questions that are being asked because they can't. It's just so overwhelming that they actually can't. And again, that could be used against a client, especially if you have a perpetrator who knows that about the person and deliberately provokes that reaction in them. Courts for everybody are very stressful and adversarial, including that goes into the neurodivergent people. So, and also an awful lot of people with anxiety, CPTSD, autistic people, ADHD people have different processing speeds. So they may not be able to, it may take them a while to figure out what's happened. Another thing that I haven't put here, but I should have, is around sign language interpretation. The sign language interpretation is extremely difficult to organise in Ireland. It's extremely difficult to resource because there are so few, and it's a much required service. But the difficulty is that you need somebody who's specifically trained in the legal system to be a sign language interpreter for the courts, and that's very, very hard to find. You don't want a case where somebody has a sign language interpreter, and because the interpreter doesn't have knowledge of the law, they don't know, like legalese is a different language basically. So that's really, really important that the person that is there interpreting Even if you have a sign language interpreter coming in to talk to a client when they're accessing refuge for the first time and everything, they need to understand. They need to be specifically trained in helping and supporting in the area of domestic abuse. And I'm not sure that that even really exists, to be honest with you. We couldn't find any information on it, to be honest. So the next one. These are specific neurodivergency issues. And the reason that I'm highlighting these is that, you know, they're termed as hidden disabilities. And there is mounting evidence for the overrepresentation of people with neurodivergent issues within homeless and domestic abuse services. Mm-hmm. And yes, there is no specific training for staff in those conditions, I suppose would be the word. So oftentimes if somebody already has a diagnosis, if they're diagnosed as autistic, anxiety, depression, OCD, Tourette's, ADHD, a perpetrator will use that to control and gaslight a disabled person, but they will also use it for the people around. They will use the, am I so good to put up with them, and look how hard I have and how difficult my life is for putting up with this person. And that can be used as a form of control. ADHD, I've mentioned specifically because it is overrepresented in the court system and in homeless figures. I couldn't find information specifically about domestic abuse, but there's no reason to believe. And the reason that that might be very important for you is that ADHD is linked to risk-taking behavior. People with ADHD, I am one of them, do not process dopamine properly. And so our brains are constantly seeking dopamine, and dopamine is what you get from taking risks. So you may find a person who consistently and constantly keeps on making risks. You know, why do they keep on making these same mistakes? It could be that. Also, people with ADHD have executive functioning, different difficulties with executive functioning. So filling in forms, completing tasks, staying on tasks, task initiation. So you may have a client who you keep on having to remind them to do tasks and keep on doing tasks and everything. The reason I'm mentioning these is that it might help you feel less frustrated if you have this in your mind that this person may actually have a difficulty with executive functioning, may actually have an actual difficulty with this. I'm trying to annoy you, to be honest. Capacity. You may have heard autism being referred to as a spectrum condition. What that means is that one day somebody might be able to do something. That doesn't mean that the next day they will have the same capacity to do it. Spectrum doesn't mean severe to low functioning. Absolutely, functioning labels are ableist and shouldn't be used. What it actually means is that on any given day, a person's sensory profile, their energy levels and everything can fluctuate quite significantly. So that's something to bear in mind, that if you have a client who's autistic, that just because they're able to do something one day may not mean that they're able to do it the next. Challenging behavior, I've put that in brackets because it's important to reframe that into your head as challenged behavior. A meltdown or a shutdown or falling or freezing, they are an anxiety response and should be more like equated with epilepsy. It's something that happens in a person's brain. They cannot control it. I've mentioned the difficulty about using the phone and attending meetings. Something like 63% of autistic people have an untreated mental illness, so that's important. I've mentioned misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis because it's extraordinarily difficult to get a diagnosis as an adult in Ireland. There is no pathway for referral for autism or for ADHD. So, and there's only a recent enough awareness that women could even be autistic or have ADHD. So you may have a lot of people presenting to your service that aren't diagnosed, or that have been misdiagnosed with things like borderline personality disorder, anxiety, depression. I'm not saying everybody who shows up who's depressed or has anxiety is necessarily autistic or ADHD, but it may be worth having it in the back of your mind that this person may actually be an undiagnosed neurodivergent person. Another thing about processing and communication differences, the autistic people communicate differently. We communicate differently to a neurotypical person, and that can lead to big difficulties with understanding each other. It's a two-way street. And there's been a lot of research into what are called thin slice judgments. So that's that kind of split second judgment that you make on a person. And what it's found is that neurotypical people will make a very quick snap decision about an autistic person, a negative judgment on, and like oftentimes the autistic person isn't even aware of what they've done or anything like that. But what it means is that we need to be aware of our biases. We need to be aware that that might be something that's there. I've spoken about executive functioning. That's the ability to plan and carry out tasks. Demand avoidance is also a sub-profile, I suppose, if you will, of autism. A lot of autistic people are what's called demand avoidant. So that's something that you need to be aware of. If you have a client who's really struggling or really just seems to shut down all your suggestions and stuff like that, they may be demand avoidant. So there may be ways you need to adjust your language so it doesn't sound like you're giving an order or you're making a demand. It's the change between declarative language and figurative language. I won't go into it too much. So the next slide. Yeah, so this is state failures in Ireland. This is kind of more like outside the remit of an actual service, but I want to mention it because the definition of perpetrators is overly prescriptive in Section 39 of the Domestic Violence Act of 2018. Basically, it limits perpetrators to being intimate partners and family members, but it doesn't, it's too prescriptive in that it doesn't really mention caregivers in the same role. And we would want that to be expanded to include caregivers in line with the Istanbul Convention, which does specifically mention that. As I said, we found it very difficult to find information on disabled women's experience of domestic abuse in Ireland. So, and that's a failure at state level. They disaggregate data by impairments. We need to break down which impairments people have so we can find out and resource different subsets and find out if there are certain people who are more at risk of abuse. Failure to provide accessible service and information, and failure to adequately fund same. So it's, as I said, we can see from the statistics that there are an enormous amount of disabled women who are at risk of domestic abuse. Yet there's very little funding to upgrade services, to make them more accessible, to give to deliver training around this. And that needs to come from a state level, not rather than individual refuges trying to fund it themselves. In terms of what we spoke about coercive control, financial control, the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act is currently going through the Dáil, and it needs to be implemented. It's been dragged out, but it needs to be implemented because it specifically talks about people's capacity and the need to listen to their voices and to allow disabled people to have that decision-making in their own, to make sure their voice is very much included. The optional protocol of the UNCRPD means that disabled people can take a case against the state if it has failed them to the UN. That's the reason probably why Ireland hasn't ratified it yet. So again, we said we need to ratify the sections of the Domestic Violence Act in line with the Istanbul Convention to make sure that it is covering instances of coercive control, whether by a family member, intimate partner, or caregiver. Okay, so the next one, please. Right, so our recommendations or further thoughts would be to engage with DPOs, as I said, that's a disabled persons organisation, and provide disability-specific training. So developed in partnership with DPOs and led by disabled people. There's a disability maxim, nothing about us without us. And that means basically we need to be included, because if you aren't disabled yourself, even if you're the most well-intentioned person, you are going to make mistakes because you're not going to know what you don't know. Recognise disabled people as equal rights holders and prioritise their will and preference, autonomy and right to privacy. And that right to privacy is very, very important, because an awful lot of disabled people who are dependent because of physical or cognitive disabilities on caregivers lose that right to privacy. Disabled people are often taught compliance since childhood, which obviously a lot of the therapies and a lot of the interventions that we use with children teach children to be compliant. And that obviously leaves them very, very vulnerable to grooming and to abuse as they grow. Ensure public information and campaigns are accessible and reach everyone. That by offering them in plain English, by offering them in easy to read language. There's a need to conduct accessibility audits and make this information available to disabled women so they know where they can go. So for example, I know there's people at the moment who are being moved to the Department of Justice. But for example, that is something that TUSLA should be carrying out, and TUSLA should make that information available on their websites so that women can find their information, that they know where they can go, that they don't turn up at your service and have to be turned away because you can't accommodate them. And the proactive outreach, what we're talking about there is the fact that 8,000 people live in residential cares. So how do we reach those people? How do we do outreach with those people and ensure that everybody who needs the information about domestic abuse and how to access the service is actually getting it? And in terms of when I spoke about the sensory environment, something that you can do is what's called a sensory audit of the building or service. And literally all that means is taking a spot and sitting quietly and seeing, what can you hear, what can you smell, what can you see? And you may be surprised to find, oh my goodness, this is quite noisy or smelly or whatever, and trying to do things to adjust it with the sensory environment in mind. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'll be welcome to take them.
That's brilliant, Gillian. Thank you so much. It was really informative, particularly the recommendations at the end. I have my mind spinning. Does anybody have any questions for Gillian now, or do you want to wait to the end and we move on to Lorraine, or would you, Bridget, whoever wants to go first?
That was very good. That was very educated presentation. There was a lot of things that you've raised that I wasn't aware of, to be quite honest, and it's a lot will be new to me, but I can relate in relation to the fear of losing custody of your children. And that would be a big issue within the travel community, especially using the service. We have seen cases in the past where children were taken away from the mothers. So there's a fear of the service. And again, you know, I suppose you highlighted in regard to training. Training would be a very big issue, especially within the travel community, where services are not provided culturally appropriate training and understand the issues that travel women face, you know, if they experience domestic violence. Yeah, but very educated presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, if people want to think about the questions, we can have them at the end. Lorraine, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm happy enough to go ahead.
You're happy enough to go next? Great
Yeah,
stuff.
there was a good bit of crossover between mine and Gillian's, actually. Not a good bit, but there certainly was some. So based on that, I might as well go next. I'll have to try and share this now, so bear with me.
Yeah, no problem. And I think that's one of the elements that we spoke about was the intersectionality, you know, people carry many of these labels, but we just did it by the 9 grounds individually because they're named. But of course, you could have many of the different labels.
So I go share screen, but I want to make sure I'm just sharing the PowerPoint now.
Yeah, so if you press share screen,
I haven't done too many of these.
No problem.
Yeah, so
and then just click on the screen you want to show.
Is that okay?
It's coming. So recommendations is what we see. Is that what we see?
Okay, no worries. Is that okay?
Perfect.
And can you see that on the full screen now?
No, you have to go to slideshow and then start from the beginning. On the top.
Okay, just a sec now. And there's another toolbar on top there. It's kind of blocking me from.
Oh, the red toolbar, yeah.
The black. Can I drag that down to the bottom? I wonder. Yeah. Oh, I can. Okay. Now, is that better?
Fab. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. So I am Lorraine Dolan from SAGE. We're a support and advocacy service, and I am the coordinator for the Midwest, so covering Limerick, Clare and North Tipperary. Siobhan invited ourselves to present today based on coming from the perspective of abuse and age, so domestic abuse and age, and what we find presented to us, I suppose, in my role every day and through referrals. We are a referral-based service. We're wholly inclusive of majorities and minorities in a manner of speaking. Referrals can be made by the person themselves, by family members, community services, GPs, public health nurses, you name it, really, we're open to referrals from everyone. So it would be pointless of me listing them all. We work collaboratively with other services, but we very much remain independent in that it is our role to advocate for the person in question, the person who has been referred. So the client's at the centre, and we advocate on their behalf and for in line with what their needs and their wishes are. As we often put it, we collaborate where necessary. We collaborate where possible and challenge where necessary. I know Gillian mentioned as well, she was talking about nothing about us without us. And our tagline is, I think they robbed it from us actually, our tagline is nothing about you without you. So that was one similarity there, Gillian. Our mission then is, let's do both these, well, our target group, is over 65s and vulnerable adults, and including those with an intellectual disability. But again, as I say, in terms of client group, it's just wholly inclusive, there's no discrimination to any cohort. Our mission statement then is to promote, protect and defend the rights and dignity of vulnerable adults and older people. And our goal ultimately is to ensure that the older person and vulnerable adult, our client, has their voice heard, and as far as is possible that their will and preference is upheld. So the what and the who, and I suppose even if we speak a bit from the how, really, SAGE Advocacy, it's a service that empowers individuals by taking action to help people say what they want, secure their rights, represent their interests, or obtain the services they need. Our clients are people who are vulnerable as a result of, sorry, half of my screen is missing because of the cameras at the side. So 2 secs. If I can move that. 2 secs. So I can't read the slides. 2 secs now.
You can pull your
I can
down on the bottom.
Or pull it down there. Yeah, is that okay? So our clients are people who are vulnerable as a result of reduced decision-making capacity, disability, mental health difficulties, or frailty in line with the aging process. Many are also, we feel, at greater risk because of their living environment. And Gillian kind of crossed over this as well. People living in a residential care facility or in their own home where they're dependent on others for care and support in relation to daily living. And I'll go into that a bit more as well further on. So I suppose relevant to today's session is obviously the Domestic Violence Act 2018. This act, as you all know, defines domestic abuse as the physical, sexual, financial, emotional, or psychological abuse of one person against another who is a family member or who has been an intimate partner, regardless of their gender or sexuality. Unfortunately, from our experiences, and in law, this does not cater for the multiple situations and relationships where a vulnerable adult can be potentially abused. For example, where coercive control is being exercised by people other than close family members. Domestic abuse is multifaceted and extends to a wide range of individuals and living environments, in care facilities, in people's own homes, and in community settings. The Domestic Violence Act 2018 does not either cover coercive control by adult children over a vulnerable parent, nor abuse in residential care settings, both of which SAGE advocates are presented with regularly. And I continue to talk about that more, whereby, you know, that relationship between the person who requires care and the caregiver, none of that is currently covered in domestic violence legislation. It leaves people open. The power and control element of domestic abuse presents itself frequently within SAGE referrals. Situations, for example, where an older person wishes or wants to remain at home, but unfortunately are depending on somebody to care for them to be able to maintain them at home, be it a family member or a HSE care, even to provide care so that they can stay at home. A dynamic which is often exploited, we feel, whereby a vulnerable person is told that if they don't act or behave or comply in a certain way, that they'll be put into a nursing home. And unfortunately, it's also been voiced to SAGE that the caregiver sometimes behaves in this manner because of carer burnout, or because there's not adequate home care supports to supplement their caregiving. That's not always the case for abuse to happen, but it has been voiced that sometimes it is the case. This power and control dynamic is also evident in long-term care facilities, again, whereby the resident is dependent on a nursing home, for example, for care, and it leaves those vulnerable wide open to abuse. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but it was the root of how SAGE was set up initially was the exposing of the scandals such as Lee's Cross, Oris Attracta, and then even most recently the Brandon case. Is that all okay so far? Yeah. So in terms of it today, again, the focus of my being here is coming from the perspective of abuse and age. And in our experience, in SAGE experience, the older person who's reliant on others for care and support are likely to experience abuse to a greater extent than those who are not reliant on others. This type of abuse can come in many forms: financial abuse, emotional abuse, or coercive control. Abuse regularly occurs in situations where there is an unequal power relationship and people are afraid to challenge or confront the perpetrator or involve outside agencies such as HSE or safeguarding. This could be, again, in somebody's own home, whereby, say, an older person is receiving, we'll say, care from, just for example, a HSE or an agency, or it could be in a long-term care facility. And I suppose it's important here, some of the key findings from the 2020 National Safeguarding Report. There was a pattern of age profile. The pattern of age profile for concern notifications was 66% for those under 65, but it was 34% for persons over 65, which, okay, it's a smaller number, but it's still an alarming statistic, really. The total number of notifications for persons over age 65 in 2020 was 3,412, and it was 3,337 in 2019. So there is a steady increase. For persons aged under 65, the most significant category of alleged abuse remains physical, followed by psychological. For persons aged over 65, the most significant categories of alleged abuse are psychological, physical, and financial. I know Gillian mentioned financial there a bit too. And alleged financial abuse and neglect increase with age, with the highest level of reporting in those over 80 years. And a lot of our referrals would be around financial abuse. So this brings me on to the coercive control element. And this is an offence that was only added to the domestic violence legislation in 2018. But again, only in the manner of it occurring in an intimate relationship, or that dynamic. Coercive control, we find, can often be overlooked by outside observers due to the fact that victims can sometimes be seen as colluding or consenting to the behaviour. Those exercising control may be viewed by outside observers as having what may be perceived as the best interests of the victim at heart, when in reality the situation may be quite the opposite. Just one example that we had in recent times, I suppose, within SAGE, was we had a gentleman who was living with MS and his wife was caring for him. And there were huge elements of control within the relationship perpetrated by the wife, mainly due to her wanting to protect. It was a completely risk averse, wanting to protect in case, any kind of harm could come to her husband. And I suppose in turn, how we viewed it was that it was removing all of the gentleman's independence and choice, and completely limiting abilities which he still had, just for fear of something happening to him. When he moved into a nursing home setting, that the relationship was, I suppose, of trying to control, you know, what he did and where he went and how much he did in the day was also being controlled by the wife via the management in the nursing home. And this was all in a bid to protect the gentleman, but indirectly was creating a dynamic of abuse. So I suppose coercive control is often perceived as that which is only found in romantic relationships or peer relationships. However, we frequently receive referrals and concerns where there's a dynamic and element of coercive control between siblings and the vulnerable older person being caught in the fire line. And sometimes it's whereby siblings or children believe that they know and they decide how the older person should spend one's own money, for example. Or if it comes down to maybe a fair deal application, the nursing home support scheme loan, like, and there's an agenda there around inheritance, or, you know, the siblings think, well, we don't want mom or dad to put a charge on the house for the fair deal because it may affect our inheritance in the long run. And this in itself is abuse. You know, this is a coercive control, a power dynamic whereby somebody's trying to control somebody's decision or somebody's choices to benefit themselves. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sorry, I have notes here beside me. I hope that's okay because I'm reading over them back. So I also felt some of the Safeguarding Ireland awareness research findings that this is between 2017 and 2021 are also relevant. The Irish public believes that abuse of vulnerable adults is widespread. Certainly in Sage, we would share that feeling. 50% say that they have experienced the abuse of vulnerable adults either through being abused themselves or seeing somebody else close to them being abused. Almost 1 in 4 do not know who to report adult abuse to. Safeguarding Ireland states that tougher laws would encourage more people to call out abuse of vulnerable adults. Public seeks a dedicated 24-hour helpline for adult abuse. That's what the public were looking for through the Safeguarding Ireland's report. 91% supported stronger laws to safeguard people from abuse or neglect, and 85% of the public support establishing a national authority for safeguarding. Again, Sage's experience, I suppose, of the reporting of abuse. Often we feel that the reporting of abuse may not reflect the true nature and extent of abuse due to sometimes a fear on the part of the victim of the consequences which may follow. Again, putting the emphasis on being placed in a nursing home, because this is something we hear a lot. You know, being told that they will have no access to their own money, lack of reporting down to a lack of awareness what their experience is actual abuse. So maybe they've lived with this throughout their lives. Maybe it's a kind of a cultural thing where they feel like, is this or isn't this abuse? I didn't even know it was when it might be raised. A lack of clarity as to whom they should report abuse to, a lack of capacity to understand and report, limited verbal and other communication skills, maybe due to a stroke, maybe due to progressing dementia, fear of upsetting relationships. Sometimes that's a vulnerable person, older person in a nursing home that don't want to rock the boat with staff or nursing home management, and they think, oh, look, I don't want to, you know, to voice something here. And sometimes, again, more than a nursing home or more than in someone's own home, you know, what will the consequences be if I say something? Will my carer come back in the morning to get me out of bed? Or when they do come back, am I going to face the consequences of having reported? Leaves people in a massively vulnerable position. Like, there is no safeguard there that somebody feels, if I report this, it will have no consequences to me being in receipt of my care. Often shame and embarrassment and a culture and a religion often impacts on perspectives of abuse, its recognition and reporting. I'm also mentioning capacity here, and I know Gillian spoke about capacity a good bit as well, or I mentioned it above, the capacity or sometimes the lack of capacity. A vulnerable person may have a diagnosis of dementia or may have one or other condition where the capacity is affected. So perhaps we call it fluctuating capacity. So on a good day, Mary might say, oh, you know, I want to seek out help with regards to disclosing of the abuse. You go and meet them, you know, you'll sit down, and she might just tell everything that has been going on, and then you could go back the next day and the capacity may not be at the same place, and it might either be, the information might be either denied that was given the day before, or it could be withdrawn or whatever. So capacity is a huge element in this, you know. And we see that a lot as well, maybe in nursing homes where there might be an abusive situation. We'll just say, for example, between two residents, even if they both had dementia or one had dementia, and if the guards were called in, there would always be an emphasis put on, oh, we need to get a capacity assessment first. I'll speak about that further on as well with regards to the new legislation. I just thought this visual was quite good in terms of, to me, it depicts the root of some of these feelings. Really, is walking on eggshells. The vulnerable person, the reluctance to speak up when you're in a vulnerable position, and it often stems, we feel, from a paternalistic culture or mindset. The vulnerable person being told or feeling that decisions or behaviours emanate from a good place, or knowing what's best, or having the person's best interests at heart. And oftentimes it's agencies or services or
Just rigid.
people being risk averse. When in truth, often this mindset and culture is completely impinging on the rights of the human rights of a person. This is a culture and a societal view that needs to change. And we certainly hope, well, I hold strong hopes that when the assisted decision-making legislation does come into effect in June, so be it, that there will be a huge emphasis placed on supporting a person to make a decision rather than focusing on capacity, but looking at where is the person at now, and despite where the capacity is at, how can we support them to make a decision, and how can we support them with choices that they have to make. So capacity won't be such an issue, I would hope, going forward. Like, even in terms of that example I said about liaising with the Gardaí, that we, even now as an organisation, we always presume capacity. If we get a referral for a vulnerable person, we'll just say in an abusive situation and we're told the person doesn't have capacity, we go out and meet them on the basis that we are presuming capacity. And once the legislation is in effect, there'll be an onus on everyone to do that. Just thought it was also relevant just to add in a couple of little points about the impact of COVID-19, particularly from a SAGE perspective. In terms of the older person, it makes a point there, the human rights of older people. There was little or no older voices being elicited regarding the restriction policies during COVID-19. And our helpline was hopping really during the whole pandemic, and not only from clients or vulnerable people in nursing homes, but family members, that were hugely being impacted, and were the voice for the people within the nursing home, saying, like, mum is in there 2 months or 3 months now, she hasn't seen anyone, her dementia is progressing, and I suppose there was very little consultation with the people themselves. The people, and is that a form of abuse? I suppose, that's open to, I'll leave it there, I suppose. But public health guidelines also demonstrate an increase in family violence. There was an increase to helplines around incidents of abuse perpetration, intimate partner violence being termed a pandemic within a pandemic. Public health measures have exacerbated risk and increased potential for coercive control. And again, I suppose, when there was a situation in a home where somebody may have contracted COVID, or a carer may have contracted COVID and couldn't go into it to provide care for somebody, that person was left even more isolated. So now they were relying on people that may not have their best interests at heart, we'll just say. So COVID had a lot to answer for, as we all know. And just to give you 2 examples, and this is kind of leading on to finish up, but coercive control and abuse. Mary spent 6 weeks, and obviously all the names are anonymous, they're all changed. Mary spent 6 weeks in an acute hospital setting after a fall at home. This will be very, as well, typical of maybe one of our referrals. Her family encouraged her to go to a local nursing home for convalescence, and without Mary's knowledge or consent, Mary's family had arranged with the nursing home for her to remain there long term. After 2 months, Mary's family refused to discuss her return home with her and continually told her to wait another while. Mary's neighbour informed her that her son had changed her locks to her house, again without her knowledge or consent, and he had also set up a direct debit to pay the nursing home using her bank account without her knowledge and consent. The nursing home contacted SAGE as they were concerned that Mary's in the nursing home against her express wishes, and SAGE became involved, and our role was to support Mary to assert her right to make her own decisions, have her voice heard, and make a planned discharge home. And yet that will be a very typical referral for us. But coming from the perspective of the family there, for example, it would often be a case of, but she can't manage at home. We know this is the best place for her, and no idea that the impingement on someone's right to be involved in the decision even is wrong. That sometimes doesn't even enter someone's mindset. So sometimes it's an ignorance or a lack of knowledge around what determines abuse. And the second example was Michael is a long stay resident of a private nursing home, single man, some family contact, and involvement. His limited mobility requires assistance with personal care and a history of mental health difficulties and a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. Times Michael has behaviour as a challenge, include shouting, threatening staff and visitors, and he's been named as the person causing concern when safeguarding screenings of other residents took place. Many complaints regarding Michael's behaviour have been received by the Director of Nursing from other residents' family members. He has physically assaulted another male resident after he entered his room without permission and was asked to leave, and more recently alleged to have sexually assaulted a female resident, some parts of which were captured on CCTV. Gardaí requested a capacity assessment be carried out prior to meeting with Michael. And I suppose often when referrals such as this come in, it highlights the lack of protective measures for individuals in residential settings. Liaising with the Gardaí, and I mentioned this already, can at times be challenging because the issue of capacity arises and the need to have a capacity assessment completed, not working from the basis of presumption of capacity. Also, these situations of peer abuse are not covered under the Domestic Violence Legislation 2018, which adds to the complexity. So, for example, the perpetrator may have a diagnosed dementia, may be unaware of his behaviours, or have, there may not be an intent there. On the other hand, the perpetrator may have arrived to the nursing home having a history of abusing, being a perpetrator, and now has dementia. And I suppose I don't have the answers or the solutions to any of this, but I felt the need to highlight the complexity of the situation and the complexity of abuse within that older person realm and the environments. And I do, again, I suppose, just to emphasise, the supported decision-making legislation will provide services within a framework which we feel we'll be more equipped to deal with situations taking into account the human rights of all the individuals involved. And then our recommendations from the SAGE perspective. So as an organisation whose greatest percentage of referrals is the older population over 65s, we feel that there should be stronger law enforcement and preventative measures. There's a clear need for stronger law enforcement in respect to abuse of and violence against adults at risk. Proactive targeting and prosecution of people who abuse vulnerable adults needs to be promoted by Garda Síochána. Abuse in residential care facilities, then dealing with this abuse presents significant challenges for society as a whole. However, there is scope for a much more proactive approach in respect of, for example, highlighting the potentially criminal aspect of much of this abuse and publicising the fact that it's a policing issue and Gardaí are available to help bring the perpetrators to justice. Information sharing, then, I suppose, a clear need to prioritise safeguarding of vulnerable adults in the context of information sharing and collaborative working between the various stakeholders. Human rights awareness, safeguarding adults who are at risk of abuse and exploitation is an integral part of implementing a human rights approach. And awareness of us all to be involved to be cognizant of the provisions of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Assisted Making Capacity Act or legislation 2015. So to conclude, I suppose just that all of us have a role to play. It's essential that service providers highlight concerns as they arise and seek support from the relevant authorities. There are large gaps in legislation, practices, systems and organisations that are very costly on individual lives and do not respect the dignity of each person as an individual within his or her own rights, her own rights. And I suppose the abuse we can see from even, Gillian's presentation to mine, and you had 3 other weeks of it, I think. Abuse takes many forms and disguises, and the conversation around it needs to broaden. Support and collaboration is necessary, challenging and changing this culture both within institutions and across society as a whole. The voices of vulnerable adults who have been victims of abuse or who live in potentially abusive situations need to be fully heard, and that's the empowerment approach, our central engagement of all sectors. And we need to acknowledge subjectivity dependent on culture, religion. And I just want to thank Claire Haven for the opportunity to present. And I know Gillian said at the start of hers that she talks fast. I'd say I, definitely ran a mile ahead for there. So I'm sorry if I went through too quickly, and I hope it was okay. But yeah, and again, just to point out, I suppose that where abuse, comes into it, it doesn't discriminate even where age applies.
That's
Thank
brilliant,
you.
Lorraine. Yeah. And that's pretty much what we're trying to get across here, that unfortunately perpetrators don't discriminate. So maybe our stereotypical perceptions of what a victim looks like can be very different than the reality. And also, one of your recommendations, the information sharing, well, that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm glad that we're already taking one box anymore. I'm conscious of time, and I'd like to make sure that we don't have to cut short Bridget and Bridgie. But is there any really pertinent questions you'd like to put to Lorraine specifically, or can people wait until the end? And if you have a question you want to ask, please do ask. I'm not saying not to. I do want to get to the third presentation as well.
No, just to comment on what she said, like obviously there's big overlaps between disability and age-related disability and stuff like that, but around the being recipients of charity rather than equal rights holders. And we have a history in Ireland of the charity model, the deficit model, the medicalized model, and seeing people who are older or who are disabled, people who have additional vulnerabilities, as being recipients of charity rather than rights holders within their own right. And I think that's where we need to, where as a society we need to start changing and need to start realizing, as you said, presume competence. Go from a level of presuming competence, and it should influence across services, that anybody who comes through your door, you presume competence before you.
Yeah.
So Julie, sorry, Bridget and Bridget, are you doing PowerPoints and sharing?
No, I'm just going to actually, I haven't got a PowerPoint today, but I'm just going to, I have notes myself, so I'm just going to read from some of that as well, and some points from that as well. So firstly, just on behalf of the National Tribal Women's Forum, we'd just like to thank Claire Haven for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. And also, for those that don't know me, I'm Bridget Kelly. I'm a community development worker with the National Tribal Women's Forum. And the National Tribal Women's Forum itself is a national network of tribal women's organisations. So today I'm going to speak to you about the membership of the tribal community, but also talk about some of the challenges, the barriers, fears for tribal women who experience domestic violence and also in accessing domestic violence services. So we would all know that women from every ethnic and cultural and social background can and do experience domestic violence. However, women from minority ethnic groups, including tribal women, can be placed further at risk due to intersection of gender and ethnic discrimination and the resultant of poverty, socialisation and disadvantage are structural inequalities faced by tribal and other minority ethnic women, which compounds their difficulties in seeking help, support, protection and long-term options when dealing in a violent relationship. Tribal women face multiple forms of discrimination and disadvantage and are more likely to be unemployed and have a low income and become dependent on social welfare payments. Tribal women then are often financially dependent on their spouse and partner's income, and this dependency then can make it very difficult for tribal women to leave a violent relationship. For many tribal women, they would not have access to money, a car, and even in some circumstances, not even access to a mobile phone. And factors like these have proven to be considerable obstacles to accessing services. Limited access to financial resources is a factor for many women. However, as the economic base in the tribal community is linked to extended family networks, there's a further pressure on tribal women to keep the family together, pressure which may force a woman to stay within a violent relationship. So, you know, there is an urgent need to address the structural inequalities of discrimination and the resultant of poverty, which places tribal women at further risk of domestic violence. Domestic violence and sexual violence are often hidden crimes, and much goes unreported. And this is true for the majority of the settled population. However, for tribal women, as well as for other minority ethnic groups, there are additional barriers to disclosure and seeking support. For example, discrimination, the actual and the feared, is a major barrier for tribal women seeking protection. It has resulted in a mistrust and reluctance to disclose and seek support from authorities, services, including Gardaí and health, social worker and special gender-based violence services. Tribal women have reported that they may be reluctant to seek protection of the Gardaí, as the fear that reporting will result in a discriminatory attitudes and treatment, including a particular harsh treatment of their husbands, and furthermore a fear of negative reaction from their own because of the level of distrust of the Gardaí that still exists within the tribal community. And there's also fears that reporting abuse will further stigmatise their community, resulting in a reinforcement of negative prejudice and discriminatory attitudes that the tribal community is endemically violent, widely perpetrated by media reports. Tribal women will often choose to protect their community against further racist stereotyping by remaining silent about their own experiences. For traveller women in access and domestic services include lower levels of literacy and language barriers, and furthermore, there's a lack of awareness of the range of services available and how to access them. Traveller women traditionally have accessed local refuges for respite and support and have built up trust in these services. However, they are often not aware of the helplines, outreach and counselling and local domestic services. Traveller women also fear that disclosing and seeking support from social workers and social and service providers will result in their children being taken into care. And again, this can leave traveller women staying in violent relationships. Another important issue is accommodation, access and accommodation for traveller women who experience domestic violence. But for traveller women, predominantly seek the support and safety of refugees when trying to deal with a violent relationship. Increasingly, traveller women are being refused access to as funding cuts have resulted in severe shortage of places and are therefore forced to return with their children to a violent situation. The failure of the state to adequately provide traveller accommodation severely impacts on traveller women's options in leaving a violent relationship. Although services are working to become more inclusive, minority ethnic groups and in particular traveller women, barriers to equality of access and outcome remain. There's a need for cultural awareness and anti-racism training and the development of inclusive policies and practice. And we are aware of traveller organisations that does provide this anti-racism and cultural awareness training, and they do this through mainstream and domestic services. And we feel that this helps to inform the development of best practice in working with traveller women. Another point I'd like to make is that there is a need for traveller women's representation in management and traveller staff needed within domestic violence services, because sometimes for traveller women disclosing their experience of domestic violence to a settled person, and that's no disrespect to any settled person, but there is fears there, but disclosing their domestic violence situation to a settled person can be difficult for some travellers, as they feel that there's a lack of understanding around traveller culture, and that the settled worker could sometimes be prejudgmental against them. And best practice would be for maybe to have a traveller woman as an option, a traveller woman or a traveller support worker available to complement the key worker of the organisation. And it's also important, that we will be advocating as well that the important to have or implement an ethnic identifier as well to collect data which includes, for traveller and Roma ethnicity in order to further develop the further development of inclusive policies and services. Also, there is a need for more engagement between traveller organisations, community groups and women's groups and services and domestic violence services. And as we feel, this helps to build engagement and build better relationships. And it's good practice to make these connections. And linking in with organisations and community groups, as I said, is a good way of building relationships. And I suppose we just wanted to say as well that the National Traveller Women's Forum have been in contact as well with the Primary Healthcare Project here in Ennis, and we've been speaking to the coordinator, Breed, and they are quite open in linking in with the services here locally in Clare. And there was even a suggestion of maybe having an open day where they could actually invite services along. So again, this is a good way of building good relationships. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hand you over to my colleague, Bridget Casey, and she's going to just talk a bit about her role and her role here in Clare. So I'll hand it over to Bridget now. Thanks very much for listening.
You're on.
Again, just say thanks to Clare Haven inviting us here today, which is a very, very important event. I'm not going to go over and cover what Bridget said, because Bridget have highlighted all the issues in relation to what we face within the traveller community. I'm just going to explain a little bit about our organisation, Clare Travel CDP. As I've said previously a while ago, I have just been appointed maybe 3 months now as a coordinator of this organisation. There have never been a travel organisation in Clare. There was previously a CDP project, but it wasn't specific on traveller issues. It was more broader in regard to people disadvantaged, migrant and so forth. there was a study carried out in 2009 with the THU and the primary healthcare in regard to health needs analysis in the travel population in Clare. And following from the study, it was recommended the primary healthcare would be set up again. The primary healthcare was running for a number of years in Clare, but unfortunately it won't. And then now it's still up and running. And from the assessment of need, the health need was carried out, it identified and showed that there was really a need for an independent traveller organisation in Clare to support the travel community on the ground. We're funded by the Department of Rural and Community Development. At the moment, we have a steering group in place, which is made up of the Clare Local Development Company, Clare Public Participation Network, Clare Women's Network, and the HSE Traveller Health Unit Midwest. So that's a steering group is set up in place, kind of directing me in my work and so forth. But we're hoping to set up an independent organisation down the road. This is a pilot project to fund them for 3 years that we got from the department. So we have to prove and demonstrate that we can run an organisation and that it can be travel-led in Clare. I work very closely with the primary healthcare women in Clare. They're fantastic women. They're, you know, we meet on a regular basis, and they be out on sites and relation to into houses and so on forth, and delivering information and so on forth. I know yourself, Siobhan, have been the previous coordinator there, and like we would like an opportunity if we could meet Clare Haven, myself and the primary healthcare and other organisations here that we could share knowledge and experience and so on forth, and work in a partnership to better outcomes, not only for the traveller but across the board. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
I suppose just to emphasise the points that Bridgie has made as well, you know, and what we've been saying, that, you know, would be good. It is a good way of making connections, and I think what the Primary Healthcare Project have said that they're open to have an open day, and if people would like to come along, any service within Clare, I think it would be a good opportunity of building bridges, and also building better relationships and working together collaboratively and getting better outcomes for the community. So that's leave from us, and thank you very much, and thanks for listening. If you have any questions.
Just to highlight, we're hoping to run culturally appropriate training maybe in the next couple of weeks, and if people like to get involved in it, we as an organisation would be hosting it, but our colleagues in Cork TVG will be running the training. So if people want to participate, I will let you know in time regarding that.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be fantastic to have. Thank you, Bridgie and Bridget, for your presentation. And again, lots of food for thought there. And we'd be delighted to liaise and work with any grouping, including I obviously have fond friendships and memories of the fantastic team in the primary healthcare program, and love to reconnect. But across the three speakers, I suppose now we have got a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions specifically to Bridgie and Bridget around the issues affecting or impacting on travellers and domestic abuse, and how we as service providers can be inclusive and open to make sure that we meet all needs that are presented to us, or if you have any questions for Lorraine or Gillian, we have kind of an open floor if anybody wants them, or if you want to say anything more yourselves that you wished you'd said, or that's something that one of the other speakers have said that reminded you I should have said it.
Siobhan, I just like to go in, just I don't know, just in regards to the input that just like to compliment all the speakers here that have kept their inputs today. And I learned a lot myself from the presentations by Lorraine and Gillian. I suppose just a question that I would have myself is just around cultural, is there many travellers employed, or have the services looked at employing travellers within their services at the moment, or is there any travellers on any of their management of the services? Just throw it out there.
In Clare Haven services, we don't have any traveller that I know of. Sorry, nobody has identified to myself that they are a traveller. That's not to say they aren't. And I don't know if Gillian or Lorraine want to have any comment there.
We have members of Disabled Women Ireland who are general members, but unfortunately, due to stigma and stuff like that, they are not they are not openly disclosing. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about them in any great detail, to be honest with you. But as I said, the overlap between ethnic and marginalised groups and disability is quite large. And we would love to kind of give talks. I would know Rosemary Maughan. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So like the opportunity is there to talk, say, for example, for autism, and I'm a founder of another group called Neuropride Ireland, and we would be really open to working together with Rosemary. But unfortunately, because of the stigmatized nature of being autistic, and then compounded with the discrimination that travellers experience in Ireland, unfortunately, it means that openly autistic traveller adults, I am not aware of anybody who's openly in both camps, if that makes sense. But yes, the experience of somebody who is disabled and is a traveller, it should be informing everything that we are doing. So if you were in a position to kind of make that connection with us, that would be fantastic, because at the moment the steering group is all settled people, and obviously we have our experiences, but we can't, as I said in my presentation, you can't know what you don't know. So
it is something that, you know, that we could come together and discuss further, you know, and it's great that
definitely very open to that, very
and that's good. You know, and I suppose just another question then that I have, sorry, just throwing it out there as well, has any of the services, I don't know, Clearhaven or any of the other, like, engage in any anti-racism training? Like, because I know it's coming up across, like, with their staff and stuff, as the service engaged in any anti-racism training? I know.
I personally engaged with some training from the Cork Traveller Network.
Yeah.
Traveller Movement. And I was a member of an organisation, the far right, like anti-far right and anti-racism network. So I've done training through them. I can't speak for the other steering group members. So we're all volunteers. So what happens is that one of us goes to training and then tries to bring that training back. So as I said, we're all disabled, so our capacity can be fluctuating as well. But yes, it's definitely something that I think needs to be rolled out. That, you know, in terms of funding, when I spoke about funding, it's not just about funding services themselves. There needs to be funding for cross intersectionality. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what we are hoping, because as I said, we're voluntary, we don't get any fund, we don't receive any funding at all. We're hoping to do a quid pro quo. So say, for example, if a traveller organisation wanted to give us training on specific traveller issues, then we would offer training around specific disability, like things like training around the UN CRPD and what your rights are under that. Training and advocacy training, because a lot of what we would do is presenting to the Oireachtas Committee around disability. There's currently the Ireland are doing a shadow report for the UN. And so, you know, we could offer support and training around, you know, how to get your voice heard and those kind of not that you may need that, but specifically for the Oireachtas Committee and those kind of things. You know, submissions and stuff like that, they're difficult, they're complicated, they're complicated. They really are. Like, even the language that you have to use and everything is quite complicated, and they're quite time consuming. And generally, if you get an invite, you get a couple of days notice. So
I know you're under pressure then trying to get everything.
It's absolutely ridiculous. You're literally told, oh, you have to have this in. You have to have you confirm it by Friday, and you have to have the thing in by next Tuesday. So, you know, in terms of training of how to be able to do that in a hurry, we've got a bit of experience with that now. So, you know, in terms of training people on the things to include and what's important. So yeah, I think it would be great. It would be great if actual funding was given to that kind of cross
definitely
thing, but you know yourself with funding.
No, keep fighting for it. I know, keep at it, and to see can we get it.
Yeah,
That's
actually, I
wonderful.
had a question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Which is why my hand is up, and I'll take it down in a second. When you spoke about that role of a sort of traveller liaison person, I suppose, or a person who works with a key worker specifically for within a refuge, do you see that being a role that can be rolled out to all refuges, or are you talking about a pilot scheme just in Clare?
We'll be saying that nationally, we think that it needs to be rolled out nationally, to be honest. You know, that's the recommendation that would be coming from ourselves, that we think that it would be important. You know, it kind of breaks down some of those barriers that traveller women have, and I think it helps to build a trust as well with settled staff within the services as well. And so we will be saying that, you know, maybe that should be rolled out nationally, if, you know, again, and it's all down to funding as well. And you know,
Yeah.
it's a lot. I'd say that will be a long way off, but anyway, but that's what we are saying anyway, that it will be nationally if that was put in place, because as I said, it would help to break down some of those barriers. And I think, you know, you'd have better engagement from traveller women that want to access the service. I think they become more open, and as I said, it's a way of building trust with traveller women, and they would access the service. They do access the service anyway, don't get me wrong, but as I said, there is some barriers for the women, and I think it'll break some of that down as well.
Thanks, Bridget. I
That's
think,
what I think
Lorraine,
of.
you want to input there as well?
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, you took yourself off. Yeah, no, and again, that's that notion of having a support worker alongside the key worker. I suppose it'd be interesting as well to have maybe one something even shared across a region or something. Maybe would be a way to achieve that as well, rather than having them positioned in one service. Perhaps it might make it more attractive to funders if it was a shared resource, you know.
Yeah, and sometimes traveller feel more safer speaking to another traveller because they understand one another and they understand the culture and so forth. So that it can be a barrier where, you know, when traveller use the service and so forth, that, you know, sometimes settled women don't understand where travellers are coming from, you know, in relation to that.
Yeah, but I think that's where some of the, you know, for some settled staff, they might have good knowledge around traveller culture, and then some settled staff mightn't have. And I think that's where the anti-racism training, or, you know, more traveller awareness training for settled staff. And that's no disrespect to any settled staff. We're not saying that here today, but we do think, you know, we are talking about better relationships, making the services more accessible to traveller women and ethnic minorities as well. And that would be one, you know, that we would propose, is that if, you know, if there was a traveller liaison officer, or even a support worker put in place, you know, a traveller, we do feel that could break down those barriers.
Something we have managed to retain in Clare that most counties lost after the last tranche of cuts was the local area network. So the Clare Local Area Network on Violence Against Women remains, and I know that there's a couple, there's one growing now in Longford as well, that there's a reinvigoration of that that network, and that network is made up of, as you probably know, all the different services to come together. And so we have, you know, social work, we have mental health, the guards, court services, probation, social welfare, ourselves. And it's actually chaired by An Garda Síochána. So I mean, it's very much pitched in the heart of services here in Clare, because obviously they bring with them a sense of import. And again, I know in the past the primary healthcare programme here in Clare were members of that, and I think that would be great if the membership either to the Clare Traveller Community Development Project or the primary healthcare project, and you would determine yourselves who is the best, or both. To be involved. And likewise, I don't think we have representation from, I could be wrong though, on disability services locally, or older people services, if there are any locally. You could probably tell me that, sorry, to have that kind of intersectional perspective as well, that we don't just work from the same kind of idea of what a victim of domestic abuse is, that we have the voices of the different hats or whatever. But the local area network is very strong here in Clare. We're very lucky that it was retained when all the rest of them were disbanded, and all the regional advisory committees were also disbanded, including the one in this area. So they were kind of an outliers for a while, but we've been very lucky in the work that we have been able to achieve.
Yeah, Siobhan, I got that book yesterday.
Oh, fab.
Yeah, there's a lot in it.
Yeah. That's our
Mm.
resource that the local area networks did on services for children. Last year we did one on services for women. So part 1. So I can send you on a copy of that as well. I have hard copies here as well. But both resources are on the Clare Haven website. So anybody can go in and see them. And that's it's basically a directory of services for women and children who are subjected to domestic abuse in Clare. And the organisations that are on the clan. And as I said, there are obvious ones missing because there aren't any maybe specific to the different equality labels. They're more around legal, social welfare, social supports, and things like that. But they're on clarehaven.ie. You're welcome to have a look and download and interact with it there.
Check it out. We could even actually circulate to some of the women as well. Like, well, Bridget had better connections than me now. But we could actually, we'd have some members as well that we could actually send some of that information out. But I must check it out.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
And we can send it out to some of our members from around the Clare region, like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or, you know,
even North Tipperary and
Tipperary and that.
North Limerick and whatever.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
And I don't know what the accessible, easy reading, Gillian. I'm already feeling there's probably deficits there that have to be addressed, but they could
look. It's really difficult. I don't want to be promising things, but we do have somebody within our organisation who has the capacity to do it. Whether they have the time to do it now is something I don't know. But just for your own information, because I realised that I said, "Oh, do you even know the difference?" and then didn't tell you the difference, which is a bit rude. Easy to read tends to be image-based with very minimal writing, and plain English is exactly what it says. It's taken, the jargon
out of it.
All that jargon out of it.
Yeah.
But I think that we often aren't even aware when you're used to using forms and acronyms and blah blah. Like, acronyms are extremely difficult for an awful lot of people. People who are dyscalculate, for example, or dyspraxic. Acronyms are just gibberish. Like, they're absolute gibberish to it.
Yeah.
Your brain doesn't work that way. So I think it's just, even if you can't get somebody in to do it for you, I do have information about websites and stuff like that where you can input your stuff and it will do it for you. So if you want that information, I'm happy to send it on later. It's just about looking at your stuff and going, okay, can we make this a bit simpler? I'm hesitant to use any kind of ableist language or dumbing things down or anything, but just, can this be said in an easier way that anybody
people can understand?
That's what we mean about accessibility. Everything needs to be rooted in, is this open to everybody? If somebody arrives at the door now, do I have to jump through hoops just for them to get the same service as somebody else? And that's what we're talking about, really. And I think that's the same with the people who are older, members of the traveller community, ethnic minorities and everything. So, for example, I went, this is only a small thing, but I went and got all our forms and translated them into loads of different languages, using DeepL and stuff like that. So when somebody arrives, we don't have to go through, like, that we're offering them it in their own language and in a way that's accessible to them. So it's just about thinking about it as well. But as I said, you can get sensitivity readers and you can get people who do that as a role of changing stuff to plain language and easy read. But there are free websites that you can access to do it yourself in the meantime if you want to. Another resource that I found that might be helpful is a project in England, in the UK, called Us Too. It was a project with people with intellectual disabilities and autistic people. Some people who have both, because not every autistic person has an intellectual disability. And they have a resource pack for service providers and for service receivers, I suppose, clients, but it might be very helpful. Now, some of the language I wouldn't stand over. Some of it is quite medicalized and it wouldn't be language that I would use, but the resources are good in terms of their suggestions and in terms of getting sort of the case studies of the people who were trying to access the support of refuges and why they couldn't and what they found difficult. And it might be handy to read that to see the perspective of somebody who has an intellectual disability and why they can't access a service. So I just thought I'd mention it. It's just called Us
Us
Too.
Too.
If you
Okay.
Google it.
Thanks, Rachel.
Any other questions, thoughts from the floor, from the other 8 people that are still there? Outside of the 6 I'm looking at, I mean.
Sorry, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say it was absolutely brilliant, everybody. But just a comment on Gillian's. I just thought it was really, really interesting that I suppose in comparison to women, that are the stats that you would normally see with domestic violence, that it's younger women and that the domestic abuse starts at a younger age, that it's more likely to increase as they get older. I was just wondering, was there anything with the stats? Is there any reasoning for that, or is it just like the stats with, I suppose, generalized domestic abuse, that it just is more prevalent in that age group?
I suppose it comes down to how much, and like Lorraine said about people who are older, as somebody becomes more dependent, as their needs become greater, then the stress and the impact on the caregiver becomes greater. And unfortunately, as Lorraine alluded to, there aren't many supports. That, like, the wait lists for support are so high, the limit on nursing hours, the limit on home help hours, all of that impacts on an individual's capacity to care, which is not in any way excusing any of the abuse that occurs, but it may be an explanation for why it increases as people age and their needs may become greater or more significant. So
It's very disappointing to think that it might be, you know, that the structures that aren't in place, that's what's causing it, you know. But thank you very much, everybody. It was all very, very interesting.